Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Before we introduce this week's guest, I'd like to start something new for podcast listeners. I either want to go over a question that was presented to us via social media, and if you do have questions in the future, please tweet those or send me a DM at the HPH_podcast. Or I'd like to talk about some ideas, either blog post ideas or things that I've seen on social media that I can provide some additional insight on based on my experience. This week's has to do with hip health in season. Fantastic quote by Eric Cressy on social media, and he's speaking about baseball players, but he says, trying to improve shoulder range of motion, rotator cuff strength, and scapular control during the season is like trying to change a tire on a moving car. Good off seasons are like a car tune-up. And he goes on to give additional information on that post, but it was so well put. And the same can be said for hips and hockey players. I mean, you look at a AAA youth schedule, it is a mini OHL hockey season, 64 plus games, 80 practices. The magnitudes, intensities, and frequencies of hip taxation in season leaves little to no time to try to increase performance in that time period. It's like literally throwing gasoline, in my opinion, on a burning fire. In the offseason, however, I think it's really important, right? Here's how we attack it. You've got increased range of motion, internal, external rotation, your 90-90 progressions, your hip scours, anywhere from kneeling to standing progressions. Your strengthening. We look at basic biomechanics, short lever to long lever, contraction profiles, isometric, concentric, or eccentric, reflexive, your patterns, more general to specific, and then your frequencies, obviously a lot more off season. It's low magnitude work, and so you can do that in high frequency. Doing that in season with the aforementioned schedule, in my opinion, is like changing a tire on a moving car. So thanks, Eric Cressy. No further, though, than today's guest. It's a fantastic talk. Welcome into all the listeners. Today's guest is CSKA Moscow, KHL's head strength and conditioning coach, Hassan Saeed. It's a really interesting conversation. Brandon Beauvais had recommended I speak to Hassan about his experiences in Russia, all the way from working to CSKA's junior team, now to the professional team. He's been there for 12 years. So it's a really interesting experience and how he's navigated that journey, the lessons he learned along the way from performance and lifestyle. Welcome to the podcast. Hassan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All the way from Russia with love, baby. So I spoke to one other KHL coach many months ago, actually not too many months ago, Brandon Beauvais. And I asked, like I do every guest, who are one or two individuals that you got to get on the podcast? And your name immediately came up. So super excited to learn from your experiences and spread a positive message to our audience. Let me start by rewinding back, maybe when you had hair, maybe when you don't. For the individuals watching on YouTube, we both don't have hair, same barber. University of Ottawa. Walk me through your early career path.
Yeah, to be honest with you, when I finished high school, I was contemplating what my next move would be. I decided to pursue a degree in human kinetics at the University of Ottawa, thinking that a high school gym teacher was the dream job. I mean, 2 months off in the summer and you get to go to gym class all day. And with that said, I took on being a student at the U of O. And after about my second I'd say my second year, I was just super lucky to get some opportunities in coaching. It kind of just took my passion for anatomy, physiology, exercise science to a whole nother level. And it, basically a functional way to use my degree and try and help athletes. It was something that I was drawn to.
So you ended up getting your master's as well at University of Ottawa. You said you had some coaching, you had some opportunities within coaching. How were those provided to you? Who were your mentors in your early career as a human kinetics slash kinesiologist at U of Ottawa?
Yeah, Ottawa is such a small little niche for hockey, especially, and gentleman by the name of Barry Brennan.
Oh yeah,
Um,
Columbus Blue Jackets, early two
Columbus Blue
thousands.
Jackets, yeah, Columbus Blue Jackets. Prior to Columbus, going back and forth from Ottawa to Syracuse to work with the AHL club there.
Yeah.
And prior to that, he was involved with the Ottawa 67s under Brian Kilray.
Oh yeah, killer.
Yeah. And so he was a huge influence on my future and my career. And as I'll get to later, he's amongst one of the biggest reasons I ended up in Russia. So he would be one. Another gentleman by the name of David Ablak, who is out of
Okay.
Toronto.
Okay.
Um, he's a practicing chiropractor now, but a strength coach that I learned a ton from. I spent some time during university summers going up to Toronto or down to Toronto, I guess, from Ottawa, and spending some time with him. We're seeing how he's working with his guys, and that would be one of my first times actually getting to work with and alongside some NHL superstars.
That's outstanding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was something. As a student, I was just beside myself, so I was super super excited, and I'm forever grateful to those guys.
Yeah, I'm piggybacking on this next question, and I can't, it's going to parlay, which was Canada to Europe. What led you down this path? And the answer I believe you just gave, which was Barry Brennan. How did that parlay itself to your first job in Russia? Were there offers at the time to be in the American League, NHL, or was it just a fit where it worked out by happenstance with those connections to Barry?
Barry was a huge influence on it. The decision was made. I was finishing my post grad, and I got an opportunity if I was interested to come over the year before I actually ended up coming over. And I spoke to Barry about that because he'd already made the transition from North America to Russia. And I decided to forego that specific opportunity and told him that if he thinks of something that would be a better fit, then I'd be interested. And lo and behold, something came up the very next year, and yeah, I took it, ran with it, thought I would be here for maybe 1 year, and it's been 12.
And 12 years later. So, again, beautiful transition here. CSK Moscow, 12 years you've been there. Walk the listener through year one. Like, imagine it was like literally drinking water through a fire hose from a cultural standpoint, language standpoint, customs, staff integration. Did you have a translator? How did it work year one for you?
Right. I think that's one thing that I'll just touch back on Brandon's interview for the listeners who
Yep.
listen to that will appreciate it. I was in a little bit of a different situation in the sense that knowing Barry, I had an opportunity to work as an assistant with him when he moved from Columbus to Atlanta when the Thrashers were there in their final season.
Yep.
And so we got to work together. The following year, Barry came over to another team outside of Moscow, and that's the same year that I forewent that opportunity that I just mentioned. And so when I came over here, it was an opportunity where Barry was working with in the KHL. Most clubs have, or in Europe, you can talk about a European sport model would be there's the professional team,
Yep.
there's what we would call in North America a farm team, and then there's a school or junior team involved, all under one umbrella, so to speak. So Barry sold me the opportunity to work with the junior team to get my feet wet, so to speak, again, and assist him with the pros and see how I like it.
Great idea.
Just kind of to see what it's like, and not only what it's like you mentioned now, the culture, the language, everything that goes along with what I would say that is completely normal to me. But I think for a North American strength coach, would be a transitional period that takes some patience and takes some open-mindedness. Let's say that.
Yep. The club model, I want to piggyback on that question. When you got there and you got your feet wet with that junior team, were you working with multiple teams or was it, the professionals, then the junior club? Like, for example, you've got in the United States, and I get it, it's not the Columbus Blue Jackets slash American Hockey League, but if you look at the farm system or the club model in Columbus, you have an 18, 16, 15, 14, and U10 team, right? They all play under that same umbrella. We work with all of those teams. When you were there for your infancy year there, working with a junior team, was it multiple teams that you trained or was it one and assisting with Barry and the professional team?
So I worked with the what would be the equivalent of a major junior
Okay.
team here. At that time, there was no quote unquote farm team, which is what the VHL league is. For the most part, they're basically a pro farm team. The MHL team is still, in theory, a professional league in the sense that there is a salary associated,
Yep.
and I mean the time that these young athletes spent, it's a profession. They're still students and they're still kind of leaving practice and going to school or pursuing some other different avenues as well. So, and along with that team, I was assisting Barry with the pro team as well. So, yeah, again, it was a culture shock. It was I don't know how to put it in plain English, but it was just to see how the pros are run over there, coming from a year removed of being in the NHL. It was it was very interesting.
Give me an idea, or the listener an idea. So 12 years ago, this 2012, what were the similarities and differences in terms and measures of training at the time in Russia compared to the United States? Very similar, very different, stark contrast, a lot of variation. Where was it?
I would say it was very different in just the sense that the average athlete in North America at that point was already taking care of his own off season. He was taking care of his nutrition. At that point, like I said, guys were obviously going to their own trainers and working with them, and had if anything, they had programs and they were coming into camp in shape, and there was a sense of understanding that if you don't come in shape, you're going to lose your spot, or there's going to be some consequences. Here, in contrast to that, because of the way, and again, I'm trying to explain to the listener as well that here the training camp and the model of how the season is made up, the preseason camp at that point was almost 2 months,
Wow.
2 months
Jeez,
long, where
it's almost
guys
an
were
off season.
coming. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was almost basically an off season where basically you're reporting within the first 5 days of July, and within the next 5 days or so, you're heading out somewhere outside of Moscow. At that point, it was Switzerland for our club in CSKA, and you're going there for almost 3 weeks, if not more. And you're doing these 2-a-day training camps. In some places, it's a bit different. It's more rigorous. Some places it's lighter. Other places, so I can only speak to my experience at that point in time. And again, the volume was for me pretty shocking, to be honest with you.
And you're talking weight room volume or just overall scheduling and density in terms of both training and ice?
Right. I would say both training and ice. I
Yeah,
mean, I've been here long enough to understand that different coaches have their own priorities and how they set up their training camps, and some of them take on the opinions of the strength coaches. Some of them have their own kind of training camp set up where they want the strength coach just to work on his aspect, but the ice and different other training sessions are based on what they've had success with in the past and what their experiences are.
Assurance, Zizorski, Vrukashansky. I mean, these were all people that you and I read about when we were in college, right? And
Yeah.
at the time, so I've never had your experiences, and that's why I'm asking, of course. But at the time, we read those texts, and you're like, wow, these guys were centuries ahead of us. The training must be so different over there. Was it? Or when you came over at the time, I'm talking the means and methods now. So I'm talking the fine tooth. I'm not talking about the schedule. Was it different? Were you underwhelmed, overwhelmed?
Again, I tried to take it very with a neutral mindset
Yep.
where I want to learn something here as well. I don't want to come in and just say the way that we've done things in the past is the only way to do things.
Sure.
I was lucky enough to work with some coaches and some players who were really open on just helping that communication barrier,
Yep.
and that allowed me to ask a lot of questions and just show that I'm interested here. I'm not trying to critique. I'm not here to say that there's one way to do all of this, because
Sure.
we all know that there's a lot of ways to get to what we want to do in strength and conditioning, right? And I never have any issues as long as somebody can kind of explain the method to their madness.
Yes. Well put. So that first year you were working with what would be equivalent to major, junior, you made the transition eventually into the professional team, correct? My
Yes.
question is, with the language barrier, from your experience now at 12 years, what do the coaches, the skill coaches, I'm talking head coaches, what do they have, what do they typically value in the KHL? And how do they want to make their decisions regarding your experience? Is it more, hey, I'm measuring and managing this as the data, or is it more communicative? Is it very similar to the North American game?
I think more and more as I've been here, and again, social media has grown in that 12 years, and there's 12 years that I've been here. The access to information, there's different coaching sites even in the last 10,
Oh yeah,
12 years that have kind of come about. I think a lot of coaches are interested in how things are done in North America. And I think each coach that I've worked with has had kind of his own way to prioritize how he wants to do things. And I've been really fortunate to be have worked with some guys who I had posters of on my wall in my garage. And so they've come from North America and they understand how it was to train way back when they were coming up in Russia. And so it's been kind of like a melting pot in the sense where, yes, they want data, they want good sounds, objective information, but they also understand that there's a subjectivity aspect to how we want to run our day-to-day operations.
Today's episode has been brought to you by Physical Preparation for Ice Hockey, Biological Principles and Practical Solutions, and the Gain Go Grow Manual. This is a two-part book series exploring training the intermediate and advanced level players. Book number 1 explores training the intermediate player. Chapters include long-term athletic development, considerations, speed training, power training, strength training, and program design. The Gain Go Grow Manual explores training the high-performance hockey player. Chapters include biomechanics of ice hockey, considerations for high performers, minimizing adaptational risks while upsizing gains, the Gain Go Grow model, and example microcycles. More information can be found at Amazon.com.
Well, let's walk us through day-to-day operations, if you will. Talk to me about your role in season. Are you the director of sports performance, strength coach? Is there a performance staff in the KHL, how they typically build in North America? Or is it, as Brandon Beauvais had said in his experiences, a team of 1 to 2 at most?
Right. Yeah. I think Brandon and I have been here more or less the same amount of time, and each club, depending on their budget and the way the management sees things, run it in their own unique way. From my experience, yes, it's basically been like Brennan explained. It's like a 1 or 2 man show. I'm very, very fortunate to have a great assistant working with me. He's a Russian gentleman who's older than I am. A former player. His name is Vladislav Brizgalov, and for me, he's been a rock star, right hand guy that we chat every day, obviously at work, but even outside of work, we're bouncing different books off each other, and it's really interesting to see. He's gifted me in the past a few of these what would be strength and conditioning Bibles from the aforementioned author that you mentioned. So, I mean, I've been really lucky. Again, we have a physiotherapist, which takes care of our rehab here. I have worked in the past where I've been a 1 man show. So I've had to run, aside from the strength and conditioning, the rehab side of things as well. And yeah, I mean, from a performance side of things, again, you're looking at data analytics, which is coming into play the last 4 years or so, I would say, in our league.
Okay.
And so that's been something, again, I know in North America, there's specialists who actually work on that, and more along the sports science side of things. Here, you're kind of juggling those along with your traditional responsibilities as strength coach.
Again, I want to get a little bit more granular. Day to day for you, are you making your decisions in terms and measures of your in season lifting or your conditioning from a week by week basis, a monthly basis? Is the North American model very similar to the KHL, meaning not all teams, of course, but a lot of teams will work out after games. They want to couple and bucket that stress. It's low volume, moderate to high intensity where you're pulling the fire alarm, not burn the house down. Is it similar in that aspect?
Yes, I think it's very similar. I think now, again, our league has guys who played overseas, and in fact, coaches now are former players who played overseas. So the mentality of training, exactly like you said, after games, some things like what you do pre-game, warm-ups, and activation sessions are very, very similar.
Okay.
Again, trying to make logical science-based decisions and explaining that to coaches who might not have had the experience, who are, let's say, traditional Russian educated coaches.
Yep.
Explain to them that these are the best pockets where we can kind of up our intensity, where let's say after a game we can work on some heavier lifting, and like you said, keep the volume low. So we've kind of kept that model, and it's brought us some success. So when you have success, nobody really tends to argue around here or anywhere, I guess.
From a day to day basis, too, I would imagine there's challenges, right? And we talked about those challenges being essentially in a new country, a new place. And I know you've been there for 12 years, but you always want to try as a coach to build your own culture. And I say build your own culture. That comes from a cooperative approach with the players, et cetera. But you want to build a culture. How did you go about doing that? Was it relying on your assistant strength coach? Was it relying on the players? Was it picking bell cows, as Dan Paff would say, 2 leaders, 3 or 4 leaders in the group? How do you go about on a year to year basis with turnover in players, creating a culture for CSKA Moscow in the strength and conditioning and performance department?
Well, first off, I'll credit Barry Brennan with creating that, let's say, NHL like culture over here. In the 1 year that I wasn't here and that he was here, from what I've seen in pictures, and then obviously as I took over here from him, is that it was, a unique situation for me when you compare it to maybe some other guys who can tell you some stories about Russia. But for me, it was a very smooth transition from that side of things. The one thing that I really tried to take upon myself was to learn the language. That created, I think, a unique bond and a good way to show my players and my colleagues as well that I'm interested in being here, not just for a couple seasons. I want to try and get involved and speak the same language you guys do. I want to learn. I want to, again, like I said, this was initially maybe a 1 year thing for me just to see how it is. And like I said, when I showed them that I wanted to learn, I felt that they're a lot more receptive.
Yep.
And it made that idea of building a culture kind of into like a fusion of North American style of training, but
Yeah.
with a Russian twist in terms of we're speaking the same language now, and we're going to get our job done, and we're going to do it in a positive and a hardworking manner.
Excellent. You had mentioned at the onset of the conversation getting into day-to-days and the contrast between different teams within the league. Now it seems as though in North America, the pendulum swings into sports science. And I think my interpretation, and everyone's inclined to their own, I think at times we rely too much on it, and it's all about numbers. I think at the end of the day, call it the metric hamburger. There's always subjectivity around the buns, what to analyze, and then how to interpret that. I think the metric's great as long as we know what we're measuring and it's a reliable metric and it affects the scoreboard, which I think the hardest things to measure are the closest to the scoreboard. My question is, what do you value right now in your landscape with the technology and the budget that you have? Is it player load? Is it readiness in terms of force plates? Is it internal load, heart rate? What do you value? Or is it more subjective in nature, schedule, communications with the coach?
I would say it as we get through the training camps that we've kind of just done, and I'll say this is that 12 years ago when I got here, like I mentioned, training camps were, on the side of 2 months. It's now come down to about 3 weeks of training and then a preseason tournament, which is basically half of what it used to be.
Okay.
And so, like I said, there's been a lot of progression in terms of who the coaches are, who the head coaches are, and their experiences. And going from the start of, let's say, training camp, I'm valuing a lot more the heart rate data. I'm trying to take a look at how we're loading guys in terms of the intensity of on ice practices, what we're trying to get done in relation to what we want to do in the gym.
Yeah.
And then as we finish training camp, then we're looking a little bit more at monitoring not only heart rates, but, power outputs as well. So we're using the just jump for like our counter movement data, counter movement jump data. And we're just trying to see like how that is translating throughout the season. So we just don't want to see too much of a fall off in terms of that data.
Hassan, do you make that part and parcel, that in-season element? Do you make the testing training and training testing, meaning they're jumping as part of training, whatever other metrics they may be, whether it's a transducer, force play, whatever? Do you make that a part of the process where you can collect that and see trends over the season?
Absolutely, absolutely. We also have a company out of Finland, I believe, named Wise Hockey, and they've come on in the KHL for the past, I would like to say, 5 years or so. And there's sensors that are in each player's jersey or shoulder
Yeah.
pads, like catapult almost.
Yep.
You're getting metrics of max speed. You're getting average speed. And so those are metrics as well that are useful in the long term. And if we can find trends there, I find it to be helpful as well.
Yep.
And I think it's a little kind of treat for the guys too, because after games they're looking themselves and they're watching their own stats and seeing their own shifts and stuff like that. So that Wise Hockey element it's been interesting. But like you said, it's a metric hamburger, right? It's
Yeah.
we can't put all the onus on only numbers.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge for everybody. I think, again, this is just my opinion, and everyone has, I think there's a lot of noise out there. I think there is some signal. I think at times it's hard to find, and you got to really look at what matters. I think it hit me in the head, probably last year or 2 years ago. I had an interview with Chad Drummond, Edmonton Oilers,
Oh
and
yeah,
he used this, and I loved it. He said, "Is it interesting or is it important?" There's a lot of things that I find interesting. Is it important? That one hit me hard. And then I had a chance to talk with John Stevens, and he said when he was working in LA, Daryl Sutter said, "How does it help the player? How does it help the player?" And those two elements where I'm like, wow, they hit me in a good way. I find, and I point myself the thumb, I find a lot of things interesting. Like
sure.
I'm a passionately curious person. Important? Wow. I think it's a struggle and a teeter-totter and a push and pull that we all deal with as coaches. I think probably especially in professional sport where you want to be as objective as possible. But it is interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely agreed.
Yeah, I think so as well. Before we're wrapping up, talk to me, and I asked the same question to Brandon. So again, the history in Russian hockey. One person always sticks out to me. He's now passed away. Tarasov, the father of Russian hockey.
Yes,
You talk
Anatoli
about
Tarasov. Yeah,
like you talk about a guy like to me, he completely changed the game way ahead of his time. The puck carrier was a subordinate to his teammates. He had to dish the puck, retrieving, picking up speed. So many concepts at the time where the North American game was more north to south. Does his name still carry that weight and that prominence in Russia? Is his name here in North America in terms of that Canada, U.S. and Russia series in the 70s and 80s was very well known.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I like I said, I've been blessed to be in Moscow for as long as we've mentioned already. CSKA, for listeners to understand, CSKA is basically the former, what we would know as North Americans, the Red Army.
Yep.
So that's where Tarasov worked. That's where Tikhonov worked,
Boy,
and so on and so forth. So the idea of CSKA is that back when it was mandatory to serve in the army, the best hockey players were gathered and selected, and they were the national team of Russia.
yep.
And so here, I mean, these guys are bigger than legends in sport. They're obviously statues, just like we have statues of legendary,
John Wooden, something.
right? And so you walk down in the Saska territories, and there are just these rows of statues of these legends, and of course, Tarasov is more or less considered the father of Russian hockey, Soviet hockey, and then there's Tikhonov, who everybody remembers from the Lake Placid games, and of course all the success that the Russians had in through the 90s in the late 80s. That was Tikhonov, and there's been a bunch of documentaries about them. Having spent as much time here and involved in this club as I have to say that you have to take that with a grain of salt, just like a lot of media is these days. However, there's something to be said that they did things, like you said, ahead of their time, something maybe unorthodox for us as North Americans. However, it was science-based, which is the best part of it. So when you start reading and researching about it, you're just thinking, holy cow, like how they
Oh,
didn't have the internet back then. How did they get around to all this knowledge? It's incredible. It really is incredible.
it truly is. I mean, he revolutionized the way the game played in the terms of tactics and the technical element. I interviewed Dave King several years ago, and I asked him about his first encounter with the Russians, and he said the pace that they played with, the counter, the regroup, the reattack, the way they move the puck. It was just at the time, it was a playbook that no one had seen. And I wanted to ask you about Tarasov because, number one, our father was Russian, and he always talked about Tarasov. We watched the old videos of him and watched how the players trained, and it seemed to me at the time, at least, that the obviously Tikhonov was a heck of a coach as well, but their characters seemed to be very, very different. One was more jovial, more loving. One much more authoritarian, and nonetheless, both got amazing results and both led fantastic teams. Final pivot here. Give advice to yourself now. If you were to do this all over again, you're a North American coach. Maybe there's one listening right now and you want a KHL experience. What would you do? How would you go about that? What mistakes did you make?
Oh, where do I start? Don't be closed-minded. Realize that you're one person amongst a million people who are used to going at a certain pace, working amongst this culture. Like I said, be open-minded with an attitude to learn. That's been something that Barry always told me, and even that was when we were in North America. And I think what Brendan said on the podcast as well, to come in and understand that it's just different. It's not bad, might not even be good, but it's just different. And to go along with that kind of mindset will help you a ton at the start, because you're a foreigner and their culture is deep in history. Things are done a certain way, and try and understand the basis of why it's done. And if you're asked and you want to give your opinion honestly. Be confident in what you know, but respect where you are.
Excellent. What's next? I'm not. I know in the North American model, sometimes there's 2-year contracts, sometimes there's year contracts. How do you view it? Do you want to be there for another 12 years? Is it a day by day, a year by year deal? What's next?
Well, next is we start our season tomorrow night.
Be where your feet are. I like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. So what's next is, I'd like to go through this season and try and be as successful as possible with the group that we have at the moment. We've had a kind of an overhaul with our club, our top club here, the pros. Quite a few young Russian players who are playing in the American League have come back here. We've had a coaching change. We've had Sergei Fedorov for the past 3 years as a head coach. We won back-to-back titles with him at the helm. Him and Barry were were the reasons I came over here. And to be honest with you, to have worked with him as a head coach in his head coach debut is something that I'll always cherish. That was really special for me. And so,
what a player he was too, huh? Oh.
Yeah, he wasn't too bad. He
not too bad.
And I can tell you, he's a guy who can still probably get around.
I bet you.
Yeah, he gets into the gym and shows the guys a thing or two. And there's a few of them. There's a lot of the guys who played in the NHL. Like I said, the guys whose posters are up in my garage.
Yep.
They still look like they can get around pretty good. So yeah, in terms of what's next, I try and stay open-minded, like I said, and if the opportunity is there to stay, and if there's another opportunity to come back to North America, I'd love to explore it as well. But yeah, I mean, I think like anybody basically our age, like families being as far away as I am right now, it can get tougher with time. And so we'll see where my folks are at, and we'll make a decision based on family.
Awesome. Our guest today has been Hassan Saeed. Thanks for joining us, my friend.
Thank you.